what's great is that our economy, our local economy, is already growing. So I firmly believe that if we want to take that $3 billion that we're willing to give to Amazon and invest it in our local community, we can do that. We can make those jobs. We can make 25,000 jobs, but we don't have to give away and allow our subway system to crumble so that Amazon essentially owns a part of New York City. We can create 25,000 jobs with mom and pops. We can create 25,000 jobs with companies that are willing to come to the table, but we should not be giving away our infrastructure, our subway system, our schools, our teacher salaries, our firefighters' budgets to a company that has not shown good faith to New Yorkers. And we can ask for more because we deserve it. I think it's really important that we understand that we need to invest in our economy, but we need to invest in our people. And to give away $3 billion to a company that has a history of worker exploitation, that's paying below what the cost of New York City is not acceptable for us. We need to have good jobs, and they need to come to the table as any company that wants to come to New York needs to come to the table as an equal partner. And you look at how Google came into New York, it was not nearly as controversial as this, and I think it's because they were willing to work with local communities. So I firmly believe that if we want to take that $3 billion that we're willing to give to Amazon and invest it in our local community, we can do that. We can make those jobs. We can make 25,000 jobs, but we don't have to give away and allow our subway system to crumble so that Amazon essentially owns a part of New York City.
I think it's incredible. I mean, it shows that everyday Americans still have the power to organize and fight for their communities, and they can have more say in this country than the richest man in the world.
What do you say to those that criticize them pulling out, that the district now is going to lose 25,000 jobs that could have come there?
Well, one of those things is, we were subsidizing those jobs. So for the city was paying for those jobs. So frankly, if we were willing to give Amazon willing to give away $3 billion for this deal, we could invest those $3 billion in our district ourselves if we wanted to. We could hire out more teachers. We can fix our subways. We can put a lot of people to work for that money if we wanted to. Additionally, those jobs, there was no guarantee that those jobs were for the New Yorkers that were here. We were looking at a deal that was not primarily putting the community first, and I think that we can absolutely come together to create an economic plan that actually invests in New Yorkers, in higher wages, and in a dignified life.
What this is a celebration of is that everyday people in the community stood up and they wanted a say in what was happening in their own backyard. It's not the community's fault that the moment they said, hey, what are the details of this? Where are the benefits coming from? Can we secure more? They came to the negotiating table, and Amazon said, we're not going to negotiate anything, we're just going to leave. But
unemployment is low because everyone has two jobs. Unemployment is low because people are working 60, 70, 80 hours a week and can barely feed their kids. And so I do think that right now, when we have this no-holds-barred, Wild West hyper-capitalism, what that means is profit at any cost. Capitalism has not always existed in the world, and it will not always exist in the world. What people are starting to see, at least in the occupation of Palestine, is just an increasing crisis of humanitarian condition. And that, to me, is just where I tend to come from on this issue.
You use the term the occupation of Palestine. What did you mean by that?
I think what I meant is like the settlements that are increasing in some of these areas and places where Palestinians are experiencing difficulty in access to their housing and homes.
Do you think you can expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd also I am not the expert on geopolitics on this issue.
What is your position on gun reform?
Well, I think that we need to be unafraid to take a very strong, clear stance on gun reform. I personally am supportive of reinstating the ban on assault weapons. I think that, many members of our military need to go through years of training in order to have access to these weapons. And the idea that a 17-year-old can walk into a shop and get one, I think, is completely unacceptable.
Yeah.
Guys, there are secret underground tunnels between all of these government buildings.
This is going to be the great society, the moonshot, the civil rights movement of our generation. That is the scale. That is the scale of the ambition that this movement is going to require. We need to understand and take a step back as to how we got to this point in the first place. Our current leadership was appointed.
Yep.
It was not elected.
Yep.
Is going to come from?
Well, one of the things that we need to realize when we look at something like Medicare for All would save the American people a very large amount of money. And what we see as well is that these systems are not just pie in the sky. Many of them are accomplished by every modern civilized democracy in the Western world. The United Kingdom has a form of single-payer health care. Canada, France, Germany. What we need to realize is that these investments are better.
Right. No, I get that, but the price tag for everything that you've laid out in your campaign is $40 trillion over the next 10 years. I understand that Medicare for All would cost more to some wealthier people and to the government and to taxpayers while also reducing individual health care expenditures. But I'm talking about the overall package. You say it's not pie in the sky, but $40 trillion is quite a bit of money. And the taxes that you talked about raising to pay for this, to pay for your agenda, only count for 2. And we're going by left-leaning analysts.
Right. Well, when you look at how our healthcare works, currently we pay much of these costs go into the private sector. So what we see is, for example, a year ago, I was working downtown in a restaurant. It is an externality, if you will, of unprecedented amounts of student loan debt.
I'm assuming I'm not going to get an answer for the other $38 trillion, but we'll have you back and maybe we can go over that.
She is the leader of Speaker, or rather Leader Pelosi. Hopefully, we'll see. She's the current leader of the party, and I think that the party absolutely does have its leadership in the House. We have our leadership in the Senate as well.
So I have 10 big ideas that you have. I have my list.
Okay.
Okay. So can we go by one by one?
Let's do it.
All right. Okay. So number 10.
Countdown.
Medicare for all. Is it too expensive?
No. People often say, how are you going to pay for it? And I find the question so puzzling because how do you pay for something that's more affordable? How do you pay for cheaper rent? How do you pay for you just pay for it? We're paying more now. So it's not that we're saying this whole system is free. Yeah. It's saying it is free of cost at the point of service. So that means that you're not delaying going to the dentist. Because you don't have the cash at the point of service.
Number 9, tuition-free public universities for all. Who pay for that?
So we already pay for tuition-free K through 12. And in the same way that we made a decision as a country to say we need to educate people to a 12th grade level, our economy has evolved, and that means we need to make the decision to educate people to a trade school or collegiate level.
So we can afford that?
Absolutely.
And if we work our butts off to make sure that we take back all 3 chambers of Congress, all 3 chambers of government, the presidency, the Senate, and the House. We can't start working in 2020.
I'm listening to all of this testimony today, and one of the questions and concerns that I have is with respect to the racial wealth gap.
Very often and very frequently, we think of racial justice issues as independent of our financial industry or independent of financial issues, but that's like saying there was no for-profit motive in the practices of slavery in addition to the scaffoldings of white supremacy. Same goes for Jim Crow, and same goes for our systems of mass incarceration, which right now 80% of people kept in federal prison are Black or Latino, but at the same time, the private for-profit prison industry is a $5 billion valuated business. So my question is really about, are we compounding the racial wealth gap right now based on who is getting the first mover advantage? And so according to an industry trade publication, 73% of cannabis executives in Colorado and Washington are male, 81% are white. In the state of Massachusetts, just 3.1% of the marijuana businesses in the state were owned by minorities, and just 2.2% were owned by women. So, Mr. Barnett, one of my questions for you is, first of all, does this seem kind of in line with your personal experience on the ground? Is this industry representative of the communities that have historically bared the greatest brunt of injustice based on the prohibition of marijuana?
Absolutely not.
So these industries are in no way looking, it doesn't look like any of the people who are reaping the profits of this are the people who were directly impacted.
That is correct.
Ms. Pross or Ms. Deckard, one of the questions that I have is, in your opinion, do you foresee investments from private equity groups or firms to kind of be funneling into this industry?
We're certainly seeing more interest in that.
And so do you foresee, do you see it's possible for a situation, is it possible for a situation where a private equity group that profited off of for-profit incarceration could turn around and take that margin, invest it as a first mover in the cannabis industry while there are still systematic barriers for investment from Black and Brown Latinos, particularly Black and Brown communities, including Latinos?
I think you're raising really valid points, but as a chief risk officer for a financial institution, my focus is just keeping my program in compliance and making the streets of Oregon safer. So I really couldn't speak to that with any level of expertise.
Of course. Mr. Barnett, do you have any?
The answer to your question is yes. I mean, certainly it's the case that private equity firms who make money in one sector of our economy can definitely come in and into this industry, and because they have tremendous access to wealth, and banks aren't necessarily going to say to a $12 billion hedge fund that, no, we won't bank you, they will turn around and have access that the average mom and pop, Black-owned businesses, Latino-owned businesses, what have you, just won't be able to actually surmount some of the same hurdles that they can.
And have you experienced or seen any barriers to entry for individuals that were formerly incarcerated, particularly for nonviolent drug offenses, to enter the cannabis industry?
Absolutely. In fact, we worked tirelessly here in Washington, D.C. to get the laws changed to allow people who had previously been incarcerated or had marijuana-related offenses to allow them to be able to work in the industry. Mm-hmm. And you do see a movement across the industry to try to make that happen, but it is a challenge.
Great. And so you see really what this looks like, it's kind of coming to big picture, is that the folks who profited off of for-profit incarceration get to profit off of the legalization of marijuana first, while the communities most impacted are last in the door.
Absolutely, but I would also say that this particular act serves to actually give a valuable tool to winners of licenses. Right. In that if banks do actually get active, then you do have an access to capital that you previously didn't have. And having started the second dispensary that I ever owned for under $100,000, it definitely puts opportunity firmly within reach.
Great, and just one last question. So would you recommend that in us kind of opening this opportunity or opening this lane, that also be paired with kind of affirmative licensing laws that prioritize frontline communities and communities that were most impacted to get those licenses first so that they can reap the benefits or recoup some segment of costs that they had bared in the 90s in the war on drugs?
Absolutely. There should definitely be social equity opportunities that allow those hit hardest by the war on drugs to be first in line to benefit.